welcome everyone for being here. Like Danielle was saying, like it's beautiful outside, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your night to join us and talk about work-life balance. One thing I want to mention about is April is counseling and psychotherapy month, and really one of the focuses for that was about self-care is mental health care. And I think that really fits about what we're talking about because work-life balance includes all those aspects of self-care. So we just want to acknowledge that we're leaning into that. And then on top of that, today is also Yellow Day, which is about really bringing awareness and normalizing mental health, but also honors those that work in the mental health field. So those that are here that are psychotherapists, that practice in the mental health field, I want to thank you for your hard work that you do and just acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge everyone who maybe doesn't work in those fields, but showed up for this because really wanting to prioritize this is so important and finding that balance for yourself. So as we kind of go through that, so we're going to be talking about finding your sweet spot. So just want to let you know that this is recorded for continual education purposes. If you prefer to remain off camera, we understand. The chat is not visible during the recorded, so you can feel free to connect with us there. I hope that maybe you'll turn on your cameras and engage, but if you're not comfortable with that, I completely understand. So obviously I'm Jessica, so I'm a registered social worker and one of the therapists at Shift Collab. So I will be doing this virtual event tonight. So in terms of my work is I help individuals and families. So I work with a lot of young professionals as well. In terms of navigating like life transitions, burnout, which comes a lot with work-life balance and self-care, imposter syndrome and parenting. So for who is Shift, so those of you who are part of Shift, you're familiar with this, but it's always good to remind ourselves about it. Those who are new and joining us and don't know a lot about Shift, we're an integrated mental health firm. We offer therapy and training across Canada. We have a team over 100 amazing therapists, and we have 12 support staff who are amazing as well nationally. We support over 7,000 individuals through therapy and counseling. In the last 2 years, have led over 400 workshops and trainings for clients like LinkedIn, Xero, Shopify, Tulip Refill, Maple, and many more. And also Shift designs and implements large-scale healthcare solutions and education programs like Maple Therapy Service and high-touch EAP alternatives. So my intention this evening is really to engage you in exploring your own work-life balance and find ways that allow for self-care. So part of this intention as well is for me to provide you information about work-life balance, to share my own experiences as well of how I've worked to establish work-life balance in hopes that maybe it provides some examples or suggestions for you that could be maybe meaningful, or even just to have maybe your own experience validated or normalized of what you're going through. And then another big part of it is I hope you reflect, like I said, reflect on your own work-life balance and engage in discussion with me and with everyone else about what this looks like for you, how could it look different in your experiences. I don't have a whole lot of slides, there's some there in there, but I'm really hoping we can have some discussion as we move through this. So I guess we should really start out with like, what is work-life balance, right? We're talking about this. And so I'm curious about, what does this mean for you? If you want to turn on your sound and share how you define work-life balance or put it in the chat, I want to hear from you and what it means for you. I'll give everyone a moment to think about that too.
I think for me, it just really means not giving, 90% to work and, 20% to life. It's really making sure that that equals out in a way, whether it's perfectly balanced or not, that it doesn't bring you to a space of burnout or exhaustion or frustration.
Yeah, Danielle, I like what you talked about and saying it's whether that's perfectly balanced or not. And we're going to talk a little bit about that too. Like not getting yourself to a place where you're getting to burnout or exhaustion because there isn't some type of balance for you. And I see Lauren, you said being able to turn my work brain off at the end of the day. Absolutely. Or still being able to enjoy my time after work, rather it just being instead of it just being recovery. I like that. Julietta, having the capacity to show up in my personal relationships and routine, even after a busy work week, that you still get to be the person you are and was before going into this field of work. Absolutely. Right. There's a whole nother part of you outside of kind of just of being a therapist too, and making sure you have that space for that too. For Steph, not letting work take over my life, my thoughts, and my time, having the capacity to thrive in both. Absolutely. Right. To feel like work can be fulfilling and you're thriving, and it feels like your personal life and, the things you do outside of work in your life are fulfilling and thriving as well. Yeah. So when we dive into kind of what a formal term of work-life balance is, it's really the extent a person can concurrently balance the emotional, behavioral, and time demands of both work, personal, and family responsibilities. So the one thing I liked, and I heard Danielle talk about, is it's not about a perfect equilibrium. It's not about having perfection in our work-life balance or equity in our work-life balance. I think sometimes we think about it as like it's even. I take this much time, 50% here, 50% there. And it's more about having the flexibility to get the things done in our professional lives while still having the energy to enjoy our personal lives. So like Julietta was saying, to still show up for your relationships at the end of the day, right? So it's having that ability to do both of those things. And the one thing in what I asked about how you define work-life balance is because the first step of creating work-life balance is understanding what it means to you. Because what it looks like for one person will look very different for another person. And so there's not this one prescribed way of having work-life balance. You need to figure it out what works for you. And the reason it looks so different is because we all have different priorities. We all have different goals, and we're all in different life stages. So I think about my own work-life balance has looked very different when I was a single individual. It's looked different when I had a partner that I lived with. It looked very different when I had children. It looked very different when I first started out in my career. And it looks very different now that I think I'm losing track, 12 years into my career, right? And so all those different stages change what we want that to look like. And so even if we're at a stage where we're closing in on retirement, our work-life balance maybe looks different there than when we started our careers. So I'm curious, some people here work in mental health field and as therapists. Why do you think work-life balance is so important for our mental health? So same, if you want to put it in the chat or talk, why do you think it is important?
I think something that Steph touched upon is something that I often succumb to is letting that unbalanced feeling take over my thoughts. So it just becomes really consuming. And it brings you to a point where you start thinking, am I supposed to be doing this? Is this how is this supposed to be happening? Am I really doing my best in this area? Am I the reason why things feel unbalanced? It sends your wellness into a little bit of a spiral for sure if you go down that road.
Yeah. When you talked about, am I supposed to, am I doing my best? Why am I unbalanced? We start to lose some of like our self-esteem and confidence in ourselves when that starts to happen. So that is absolutely, why it's important for your mental health, because you can see that lowered self-esteem that could happen, that confidence, or that those unhelpful thoughts like, oh, am I supposed to, should I be doing this? Right? That start to pop up. Anyone else? But why that would be really important for your mental health. Yeah, Christine said we're susceptible to burnout. Absolutely. Right? When we get so out of balance, we have that burnout that can happen. Yeah. So some of the reasons that can be really important is when we're kind of seeing that work-life balance, the most common things for people that don't have that balance can be around depression and anxiety. I think about my own work that I've done with people, and I've seen so many people who come to me to the point of burnout. And when we look back at how much they were balancing their lives, that wasn't happening. And they were feeling results of anxiety and depression about going to work or about their personal lives. Also, like we talked about, you can see that lowered self-esteem that can happen. Maybe more like more questioning of your abilities and your capabilities that are happening in those moments as well. Things that you felt that you knew how to do really well, all of a sudden you're questioning your ability to do that. Substance use, irritability, difficulty concentrating, migraines, right? Those physiological responses, migraines, headaches, weakened immune system. I think about when I was in university, when I was studying and had exam time. That's all I did was study nonstop, nonstop. As soon as they were done, I got sick. I always got sick every single time because I had no balance and it was just stress the entire time. And my immune system got weakened. And I always ended up with the worst cold as soon as I was done. So that's kind of that proof of showing what happens when we're not balancing out those stressors, when we're not balancing out our professional and personal lives. Think about too, when you take a vacation and you've been working really hard and you finally decide, I'm going on vacation. Like, how many of you, like the first night, second night, you sleep for like 12 to 14 hours? Because you finally can shut everything off, right? So those are the things you can see when those things get out of balance. So what are some things that tell you you are lacking balance? Like, what do you notice happens to you? So I talked about some of those things. What is specific to you that you notice comes up for you?
Jess, you kind of just hit the nail on the head for me. I noticed that like by the weekend or just at certain points, if I've had a really busy week with anything in general, I just get exhausted and just feel like I just feel really heavy.
Mhm.
So that kind of shows me that I'm carrying a lot of stress when that happens and I just don't feel my best. And I've always been really bad at like pinpointing what that is and maybe blaming some other things or making excuses because I'm always just like, well, I have to work really hard or I have to get these things done. And then it just kind of falls on my wellness in terms of how I'm feeling and thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. So that exhaustion or that heaviness that comes up. I'm just going to pop into the chat and seeing some things coming through there. So that dread or that Sunday scaries to the extreme about the work ahead. Absolutely. Stop doing things that you enjoy, and finding the energy to see other people becomes increasingly difficult, right? It doesn't leave that space to connect with other people. Low energy, decreased appetite, isolating from friends and family, decreased self-esteem, irritable, sad, heavy. So hearing that heavy feeling again, lack of sleep, absolutely. Unable to concentrate, unmotivated, decreased appetite. Overall, just like feeling ungrounded, getting frustrated really easily. Absolutely. Right. Those are all those things that we can notice about ourselves. Those might be your indicators too, that maybe your balance is a little bit out of whack, right? Like you're not in a place that works well for you. So let's evaluate. You know, we talked about how do you know when that's lacking. We've talked about like what is work-life balance. So I'm curious about how you would rate your work-life balance. So if you think we're going to do a poll and it's an anonymous, but I want you to rate how you see your work-life balance. So from one, like non-existent, and is five showing up in there? I can't see five. I see 1 to 4. Oh, five's there. You just have to scroll down. Sorry. I'm on an iPad. I can't see everything as well. And to 5, that you have really great balance. So maybe that one's non-existent, like you're so off balance, you're dizzy all the time. And 5 is like, I'm doing a great job at this. I'm killing it. So go ahead and rate where you are and let's kind of see where everyone's at. I hope everyone's had a moment to put in their number and we'll kind of take a look at where that comes in at. So I'm not sure, Danielle. Oh, there we go. Okay. So when we look at that, 9% of you said that was non-existent, right? 45% of you rated that as a 2, 9% at a 3, 36% at a 4. That's great. And 5, we didn't see anyone at perfectly balanced, right? So it sounds like a big majority you're feeling kind of in that lower range of having some of that work-life balance. I want you to think about that number that you scored and really define for yourself what that number means to you. what does, I know a lot of you scored a 2. What does 2 mean for you? What does 4 mean for you? Right? Because I defined that 1 and that 5, but I'm curious for you to think about what are those numbers? Because we'll come back to that a little bit. So, what gets in the way work-life balance? What do you think are those barriers to having it? What gets in the way for each of you and your unique roles in your professions? What gets in the way? Capitalism. Yeah.
I think my own ego.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think for me, it's just like if you put things off work, then you just have to get to them later anyways. So
Mm,
it always just piles up.
yeah, absolutely. You put things off and then you eventually have to get to it and then it just piles up. And so that just gets in the way of being able to have balance. Absolutely.
I think because of current like job insecurity, people are thinking they
Mhm.
have to go above and beyond and constantly push themselves to prove themselves just to
Yeah.
retain their jobs. So yeah, that's a big
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I think that's really valid, Liz. You know, that job insecurity and really feeling like maybe you need to prove yourself and go above and beyond to show your value in your workplace. Absolutely. Lauren, you said about trying to do too much. Like you get excited by too many things, and it's easy to say yes in the moment. Absolutely. And then it builds up, right? So saying yes all the time to things because you're excited, but realizing, oops, maybe I took on too many things. Absolutely.
I think building on what Lauren just said as well, it's just the fear of saying no. So I'm weak or not doing enough if I say no. And
Mm,
for me personally, that comes with a fear of letting people down.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That fear of saying no, fear that you're going to let people down in those roles, trying to do it all and having high standards that we set for ourselves. Absolutely. Yeah. All of those things are absolutely barriers to being able to have that balance. Some other things that might come up are having long work hours. So many people work long hours that are outside of, the standard 40-hour work week, and that can really make it difficult to find time for family, for friends, or for other interests that we have. Lack of flexibility is a big one for people. Sometimes we have rigid work schedules that don't offer flexible work arrangements. So some jobs don't have remote work that you can do or don't have alternative work schedules. And that can make it difficult to juggle, work with your personal obligations that you may have going on. High workloads. So heavy workloads can make it difficult to achieve that work-life balance. You might feel pressure to work long hours. So I think that ties into when we were talking about job insecurity. So sometimes we carry a high workload because we have that pressure to feel like we need to show up in that way. And then we can, sacrifice personal time to meet those deadlines that are coming up. Technology as well. Work is so accessible now. I think that really shifted through the pandemic about we can access work almost 24/7. Right. And so it can make it really difficult to disconnect, to unplug, to recharge because we're just always available. I think about my experience through the pandemic, and I previously worked in a job where went into people's homes and did therapy there. And then when the pandemic happened, everything went virtual. And all of a sudden, I was available to clients all the time. I had email always available. I could do my case notes and time off work hours that I wasn't supposed to. And so that access, excuse me, that access to technology got in my way of having the balance that I needed. Sorry, I'm just going to grab a drink of water. When we think about cultural expectations, so some workplaces have cultures that value long work hours and strong work ethic, making it difficult for employees to prioritize personal time. I think about a person that I talked to recently where the culture in the workplace was the idea and the expectation that if you wanted to grow in the company, that you had to work beyond what is expected of you, that you saw employees get value who worked outside of work hours, did extra. And so that cultural expectation can get in the way of being able to have balance and to have that self-care that you need to cope with that stress. Financial pressures, absolutely. With job insecurity, maybe working long hours and multiple jobs to make ends meet. We know it's been hard with inflation, the cost of rent, the cost of housing, the cost of groceries, right? You may have that financial pressure to be working longer hours, to do more sessions, to make up that demand financially for yourself. Caregiver responsibilities. So if you're caring for children, elderly parents, or others, it's difficult to maybe balance work with those caregiving responsibilities as well. And just stress. High levels of stress can make it difficult to focus on personal activities, can lead to burnout, right? We talked a little bit about that kind of happening at times. And that all makes it difficult to achieve that work-life balance. So when we think about 5 aspects to balance, so we're going to talk about kind of each of these of how they kind of allow us to get to that balance. So the first one is really about understanding your priorities. I'm sorry, yeah, there's text in the top corner. I apologize for that. So how do you determine what is most important for you in your life? And how can you align your work with your personal life and these priorities? So as we talked about, work-life balance can shift and change based on where we are in our priorities at different times, in a given times. So what is important at the beginning of your career might be very different than it is now versus 2 years from now. So I think about in my own life, I've had different seasons where I've had to reevaluate my values and my priorities and look at how do I align for these. So when I was a student, my priorities were very different. It was about my career, right? And it was, as a student, it was about finishing school. New in my career, it was about focusing on my career and moving forward in my career. As I became a parent, it was about having more time for my kids. And so my priorities kept shifting. So when we think about priorities, it's often good to step back and look at your values. By doing so, you define what is important to you and you reflect on whether you're putting enough time or energy into each of those values. You can then inform what your priorities are and the changes you need to make for yourself to align with those. So we can think about those bigger picture values. So things about like growth and career, financial, family, children. So we're going to do a bit of an activity. So on the next slide, I have a list of different values. I want you to take a look at these values. This is not an exhaustive list. You might have other ones that I haven't included in here, but I put some of the ones that I hear a lot from others and I hear from myself as well. I want you to look at this list and pick 3 of those values that are important to you. I want you to then think about those 3 values, put them in order of importance. You can do this by writing it down. You can just think about it in your head. But thinking about those top 3 for you. So now looking at those top 3 that you picked, I want you to think if you're putting enough time and energy into those values. So if you were to scale, we use the scale from 1 to 5 again. So 1, not at all, and 5, you're completely satisfied with the amount of time and energy. Scale those about how well you feel you're putting your time and energy into each of those values for yourself. I apologize, I'm getting over a cold, so when I talk a lot, I start coughing. So I'm curious if you want to share what you noticed when you did that and you thought about your values. If you notice that, yeah, I'm at those 5s, I'm aligning with those, or that, I'm not really aligning with those values that are most important to me right now.
I feel like for me, I'm definitely not prioritizing them. And this was a really great like visual way for me to actually see it on a scale for myself. I haven't done this yet or before. Definitely on the lower end of my top priorities for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Did they notice anything that surprised them or anything that you felt like, okay, yeah, I knew this about myself? It's interesting when I've talked with some people about this before, where they talked to me about like the importance of their job and their career. And when we actually sat down and looked at their values, that didn't end up in their top values that they had for themselves. And then they thought, you know what really made me feel like having a fulfilling life was maybe more about relationships or connection. And that wasn't what they were prioritizing at the time. So for some of you said, surprised that I had a harder time even naming values than I expected. Yeah. That you pour a lot into one single value and not enough into other top values. Yeah. And you may have more than 3 top values. It was more for the purpose of this exercise today to think about that. But it's also hard if, you know, we're thinking about 10 values to pour into all of those all the time, right? And that's where it's coming about, we talked about prioritizing. What are your top 3? What's the first one? What's most important to you? So going from there helps you to look at, are you putting enough? And what I encourage you to think about is, what is something you can do to improve those areas? Right? If you taught, you know, professional development as one of your top areas, but you haven't been putting time and energy into that, what would you want that to look like? Right? We can say these are our values and these are the things we want different, but sometimes we don't actually think about, like, what is my ideal way for this to look? Like, what do I aspire this to look for? And then looking at what those changes can be, which we'll look a little bit more at. We go back to the aspects. Did anyone have anything else they wanted to comment on that before I move on? Okay. So the other aspect around setting boundaries. So do you have clear boundaries between work and personal life? And how do you communicate these boundaries with others? So I'll share an example. When I was early in my career, I did not have good boundaries with work because I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to say yes to everything. I also felt like I didn't have permission to say no and to have boundaries because I was new and I had to prove. So I felt like there was no permission to do that, even though no one ever communicated that to me. I eventually learned from some of my coworkers who I valued, who had been working longer in the field, who had lots of skills, actually had really great boundaries, and they were respected in the workplace. I learned that I could say no when my caseload was heavy and I couldn't take on more. I could have a conversation with my supervisor and be like, yeah, this is too much for me, versus just saying, yes, I'll take it. I learned that I could say no to taking on an evening group when maybe my personal life had a lot going on and I just couldn't manage more work on that, right? I learned that I could disconnect from work. I didn't have to always be available at the end of the day. And so that's early in my life how I was able to really establish those boundaries and move past this thought that I didn't have permission to do that. I just want to check in the chat. I saw Lauren asked, what would you suggest for different seasons when you have to sacrifice some values for others? I had learning as one of my top 3, which makes sense since I decided to go back to school. But then that impacts my ability to prioritize my other values like community and simplicity. Absolutely. And so when we have those different seasons, when we can acknowledge that one of your top values is learning, it's maybe letting go of some of that guilt of not leaning into some of your other values right now, right? And it's looking about, okay, what are some opportunities? Maybe there's some boundaries you can put around school. So maybe not studying so late at night, or setting aside certain times to be part of your community still, to still have those things exist for yourself. I'm curious if anyone else has any ideas when you're sacrificing some values for others, because those different seasons, different things become more important.
I found it helpful when I was doing my master's to share with my friends and stuff that my priorities were changing temporarily. So then they knew that if I was like disappearing like a hermit, that it might be helpful to reach out, but also that I'm just really busy right now. And that helped to take away some of that guilt.
Yeah. Olivia, I really like that clear, like setting boundaries that like right now, like I'm really focusing on school, but you also communicated what you needed, right? Like if you don't hear from me for a while, like you can reach out. Like, I need that still, but no, this is what I'm focusing on right now. So being able to communicate those things when your priorities are shifting for some time and you can't maybe pour into another value as much. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious too, when we think about boundaries, like we talked about earlier, it's like really easy to blur those lines with technology between personal life and work life. So I'm curious, like, do people turn off their Slack notifications or turn off their emails at the end of the workday? Or are you still getting those at 10, 11 o'clock at night? Right. And so that's also looking at, like, if your value is diving more into your career right now, maybe you leave those on more often. But if it's about stepping away, having those boundaries about when you are available. So I'm curious, what are some other ways people have learned to set boundaries? And how do you communicate these? I'll give an example. I'm going on vacation in 2 days. Really excited. How I've communicated that, my boundaries when I'm on vacation, I've let my clients know I'm unavailable. I will not be responding to emails. I've directed them to where they can get support. I will turn off my notifications on Slack while I'm away. I won't be checking my emails. And I've let staff know that I won't be available during that time as well. There's a way that I've set boundaries to have my balance while I'm away and I'm focusing on my time with my family, which is an important value for myself. So we talk about time management, right? What are effective time management strategies that can help you to be more productive? When I think about those here who are therapists, like case notes, right? Carving out time to do this. I know this is one of my pain points in terms of my work-life balance is getting my case notes done efficiently and in a fast manner. And I end up spending time later at night doing it because I don't. So thinking about having that balance, is there a way we can manage our time better to do that? So is it carving out a specific time to get our case notes done? Having in your schedule only seeing so many clients a day or a week and sticking to that. So we're not burning ourselves out because we've now taken away from some of the things that are important in our lives too. What about other people? Do you have any other ways that you found for time management?
So you've mentioned something that I've recently done. So I had Slack on my phone and I was very much making myself available at all hours. And I decided to take it off my phone because really I don't need it on there when I have it on my computer during work hours. But even after I deleted it, I found myself wanting to go to check it because I just had this like overwhelming feeling that I need to like stay up to date, or if I need it, I'm there. But that meant like I find myself working into the evening, and it's definitely changed even in the last 2 weeks that I've done it, not having it on my phone to physically not be able to check it. So that's something I've definitely done.
Yeah, so that time management as well as a boundary around when you're available. Absolutely. So checking it during work time and making yourself unavailable when you're not and having that boundary around it. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think you also hit a good point earlier where now work from home, work is always there. And it is true. It's always in your face. So you always feel like, oh, I'm just going to check this for 5 minutes. But then, 25 minutes later, you're deep diving into something that's a tomorrow problem.
Absolutely. And Julietta, you said, only offering evening slots on one night per week to make sure I have evening time to myself again. Absolutely. This is a time management and a boundary thing that I had to learn as well. Even not that long ago, I was being so accommodating that like, okay, you can't fit into my Monday night. You're only available on Thursday night. Sure, I'll do it. And then I realized all of a sudden I'm working like 4 nights a week and I have no time for myself at night, right? No time to be with my family at night. And so learning to manage my time better and then having my boundaries as well as when I'm available in the evenings. And if that doesn't work, you'd be surprised. A lot of people find ways to make it work. Lauren, you talked about putting both focus time and downtime into my shared calendar when all my notifications are muted. Absolutely. Yeah. So scheduling in focus time and downtime. Absolutely. That's a great strategy too. So self-care, work-life balance is self-care, right? It's about finding time for self-care. So what are self-care practices that help you stay recharged and balanced? So thinking about like the things that you enjoy doing that essentially like fills up your emotional cup, right? It allows you to feel full, makes you feel nourished. Because when you're supporting others or we work in high demand jobs, it's so important to take care of ourselves first, because then we're pouring from an empty cup. When we're trying to support others or have lots of demands, like we're running on empty and we can't show up as our best selves in the work that we're doing. And then we just feel burnt out in all aspects of our lives. So that saying that's true, it's true about like you have to put your oxygen mask on before other people. We all know that one, right? For helping someone else. That's so important. And so I always encourage people to think about like what nourishes you, what feels good for you to do. What are some ideas of what you do for self-care? I know some things for myself is reading. That's a big one for me. And that actually helps me cope with stress and it helps me turn off from work and helps me have more of that balance. Another thing for self-care is, you know, I've joined a volleyball league, which I'm pretty sure I'll throw out my shoulder. So that'll be a lot of fun. I joined a volleyball league and that's about my self-care because it gives me connection with other people, which is really important to me. It fills my cup. It lets me spend time with my partner who's going to do it as well because he's really good at volleyball. It also gets me out and gets me outdoors. And so that's part of my self-care to be able to do that. I see. Yeah, connection and being outside, stuff. Absolutely. Meal prep has made a difference in helping me stay healthy during the week. Absolutely. Right. If that's something that you value, is having that ability to eat things that nourish yourself. Recreational activities like fishing. Absolutely. Janelle said she's a big TV series lover. So ensuring I have time for my evenings to watch your shows. Absolutely. I think Love is Blind got me through the pandemic. I'm pretty sure that's what helped me to cope through that.
Yeah, we're on season 4 and it is still terrible, but I've watched it all.
Absolutely. Connection being super important. Yeah. So you, Christine was saying your cousin's your neighbor. So you make a point to see her at least once every 2 weeks. Absolutely. Right. It's having that connection is so important, which is interesting because it leads into my next discussion about managing stress, because a lot of managing stress is about self-care as well. But what I'm going to talk about in terms of managing stress is about rest, right? Before we kind of get into that, you know, how can you recognize and manage stress in your work and your personal life? And thinking about like, what are your coping strategies that can help you? So sometimes coping strategies are boundaries. Sometimes coping strategies are time management. Sometimes coping strategies are connecting, physical activities. Those are all coping strategies. You know, those who are therapists that are here, like, you know what coping strategies are. We talk about them all the time, but sometimes we don't do it for ourselves. And so it's recognizing those. So the reason I want to talk about rest is because it is so important. It makes us more persistent and makes us more productive. So we only do our best at a task for a limited amount of time, a little amount of energy and attention, and then our performance drops. Our attention wanders, we lose motivation. And resting after a depleting activity actually limits the effects of fatigue. So when we, one of the comments about like time blocking for like, I'm going to say rest, right, can be helpful because it gives us that moment and actually limits the effects of fatigue in that moment. So without rest, we risk being more stressed, which then can lead to burnout. Rest includes things like sleep. So when we think of rest, we probably think about sleep, but there's also this active rest that we can be doing. So active rest can include connection with others. It can include physical activity. So we know physical activity improves our sleep. We know it, you know, completes our stress cycle. So if we're really stressed out, it helps us kind of complete that and say, you know what, we don't need to be stressed anymore. We're safe, right? We can move from stress states to resting states when we get movement. Mindful eating. So maybe it's meal prep. So that way you're nourishing your body, but also active rest and mindful eating can be about like eating without distractions. So actually focusing and noticing what you're eating, like noticing the tastes and the textures, turning off the TV when you're doing that. Doing meditation is a way of managing stress and having active rest. Social time, right? If you have like an appetite for social engagement, like that is really what fills up your cup, is to have social events. That's active rest. And then think about like your bedtime routines. That is also active rest that happens. Maybe you do like a skincare routine and things like that as well. Those are forms of active rest. So I'm curious, like how much of you are prioritizing your sleep? Do you have a routine? Are you getting enough sleep? So Lauren says she's trying to. Yeah. Every single day, 9 hours. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, Danielle trying to. I can't function if I don't. Yes. I'm like that too. I'm like in 8 to 9 hours and I'm good. And then when I'm losing sleep, I need to catch up on that because I know my stress is going to get higher from that. Absolutely. So it's interesting. I was doing some reading about rest and active rest, and I thought this was really interesting. So I wanted to share it. So we think about like how much rest is adequate. So research says about 40%, 42% of our day, we should be in active rest or sleep. So that includes sleep, 42% of our day. So this is the percentage of time your body and your brain needs to spend resting. So that's about 10 hours out of every 24 hours. So that includes your sleep at night. That includes all those things we talked about: connection, movement, mindful eating, meditation. The idea is what our bodies actually need is about 10 hours out of that 24 hours. Does anyone think they're meeting that? If they're able to do that? Danielle has like a shocked face. It's going, yeah.
I would have never thought that. That's actually really high. And I am absolutely not meeting that.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying, wow. Yeah. So I think part of balance is also prioritizing ourselves, because like we're talking about is when we're dealing with stress better, like we can show up better for our jobs, right? We can better concentrate, we can better focus. Yeah. So make sure we have the energy coming in that we have going out as we help other people, allows us to stay committed to the people, to the work, to the ideas we love and we're passionate about. You know, the therapists are here. We're in this because there's something that gives us fulfillment when we work with people. If you're not a therapist, like the jobs that you're doing, I hope you're in jobs that you enjoy doing, right? That you feel passionate about. And when we can prioritize ourselves and manage our stress and our self-care and set, time management and set boundaries and know what your priorities are, you'll hopefully find more of that balance and show up in your work in the way that you would like to, in the way that we want. So when we think about these 5 aspects, keep in the top of your mind. If we go to the next slide, what is one aspect you can work to improve on? Is it about knowing your priorities better and your values better? Is it about having clear and express boundaries? I'm going to say express boundaries are really important. Is it about your time management? Is it about having more self-care? Or is it about your coping strategies? What do you think? What do you think is the one aspect you can work on? Expressing and sticking to boundaries. Yeah. Time management and managing stress, they go hand in hand. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these all are intertwined together. Yeah. Anyone else? When you think of those 5 areas is something that you feel that you could work on. Getting clear on what my present day priorities are. Yes. I think I forgot to talk about that. So when I talked about priorities, thank you, Julietta, for making me think of that. When I talked about priorities, we talked about like those big picture priorities that are really important to us. Part of work-life balance is also on our present day priority. So I think Julietta meant present day in this moment of your life in this season, but the day-to-day priorities as well. So when we think about our day, like what do I want to accomplish today, right? And setting those priorities of what we want to get done, that's just as important too. I think about the stress I mentioned I'm going on vacation. And so this week there's been, packing that has to happen. I have to clean things. I was preparing for this virtual event. Plus I did my sessions with clients. Plus it was Easter weekend. So I had so many family events going on and I could feel my stress levels going up and I was getting out of balance. But what I reflected on is, okay, what's my priority right now? My priority right now is to be prepared for my virtual event, to do my sessions. Once I get that done, then I'm going to prioritize my vacation. And so even though those aren't my overarching priorities in day by day, in this moment, that's what I need to focus on. And it makes me think back about the question about like, if you're in school, right? Maybe right now that's what we need to prioritize on at this moment. But our overarching priorities are this, and we can get back to that. Yeah. Yeah. So Steph, setting my priorities on a daily basis and managing stress and developing those healthy coping strategies. Absolutely. Okay. So with that in mind, I want you to think about, if we go to the next slide, what is one small change you can make for yourself right now? One small thing. I want you to think back to that number that you scaled yourself at earlier. And I want you to think about what would you need to do right now to get yourself up half a point? Not all the way to 5, not a whole number, but just to change half a point higher. What would that be? One small thing you could do different. I would share for myself, right? I've worked really hard on getting really good work-life balance. That has been something that I have prioritized for myself and figuring out how to do that, what works for me and my family. I've made lifestyle changes. I've made changes in my career that aligns with that for myself. But I would think for myself, one small thing I can do is turn off my Slack notifications. You know, as much as I talk to all of you about doing that, I think I need to work personally on unplugging and setting myself to not go back on after a certain time. Danielle, you said, you know, you were talking to Steph this morning that you're not allowing your wellness to get missed anymore. Yeah, absolutely. So what are you going to do for your wellness? What is something that leans into your wellness that you're doing? What's an actionable item?
So for me right now, it is actually ending my day when I should be ending my day and not working well into the evening, or popping back into work when something comes into my brain. I've instead started to write it down and star it. So that'll be my first thing tomorrow morning when I begin my work day.
Correct. Yeah. So actually defining what, like, I like that. Do you define what that means to not allow your wellness to get missed anymore? Here's an actionable thing that you can be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, you talked about scheduling in your calendar at the end of the workday and doing a brain dump. So I don't have to worry about forgetting things when I come back the next day. Absolutely. Right? Something you can do is, you know, you let all that out. And so then you can lean into those other things that you want to do for yourself. And you feel confident about the next day. You know what you need to do. You have that ready for yourself. Absolutely. I like that, Lauren. Anyone else? So Steph says, kudos to you, Danielle. I like that and resonate with that so much. I also don't want to ignore my health and wellness anymore. Choosing happiness more often. So Steph, what is one thing you can do, one small step that prioritizes your health and wellness?
I actually just thought of one when you asked that, and my nephews are all at the park right now. So I think after this webinar, I'm going to get outside and hang out with my family, hang out with my nephew, instead of working on that very long to-do list with work or school.
That's awesome.
Choosing happiness.
Choosing happiness. There's
Yeah.
something actionable that you can do. Yeah. I think when we think about work-life balance, sometimes we're like this big idea that we need to reach, but remembering like we need to start small. It's small changes that we do over time that lead us to get to that balance that's so important for us, right? Changing everything at once is so hard, right? But those small little things that we can implement that make us feel fulfilled, make us feel our cup is full, and allows us to show up for work in the way that we want to and not get to that place of burnout. Yeah, I've learned that the hard way too. I got burnt out before in a previous job because I wasn't prioritizing myself. I wasn't prioritizing the things that were important to me. And I had to work hard on that balance. And my balance isn't 50-50. And my balance looks different now, maybe with my kids being school age, than when they were babies, about how much I work and how much I'm willing to work. And I've learned that through these small changes. I've made big changes and I've made small changes along the way that allows me to do that. Yeah. So I encourage you to think about the one small thing you can do. And I want you to know, like, you've got this. You can do it. right? We don't want to think about like the big end picture of like this balance that we're going to have. I want you to think like you got this and you can do something now to have more of that balance, and think small, think of the small thing you can do. And then what can be helpful too is think about, you know, who's going to keep you accountable to doing that change too? Who are you going to let know that that's what you're going to do? That is that small change you're going to do, and hold yourself accountable to that.